Okay, I apologize for arriving late today. Let's go to the homework assignment that this is due today, right? Where you were supposed to evaluate different hypotheses about the structure of verb phrase. This is a little bit simplified version of it, but there were basically three hypotheses, and these were them, right? And so there wasn't like a right answer, because, or did I say to pick one that was best or something? I don't remember. I was supposed to say, well, what's the problem with them, right? So that's, because none of them work, right? But I mean, they all could work, right? But none of them work well in terms of the set of assumptions that we're using about the structure of clauses and the facts about how this construction works. So we're assuming some version of X-bar theory where there's a head for every phrase. Every word is a head that projects a phrase, and each head projects one phrase. Each phrase has one head, right? And that the arguments of heads are expressed if they're expressed syntactically, then they are expressed as a specifier or complement of the phrase that the head projects, right? That's the basic idea. Now, it could be that these things are just wrong, right? That's one possibility. And some of these hypotheses, to the extent that they've been used, just assumes that they're wrong, and there's no reason to have them. But hypothesis C, for example, which I've used myself in looking at this construction, was based on a theory according to which this was unproblematic, and you have it all over the place, that a single word can project more than one phrase. So that's called I don't remember what I called it, so it's been a while. The dual lexical category hypothesis or something, right? And then we observed that these structures have, so the interesting thing is that the internal structure at some level is that of a VP. So if we have, I can't imagine my mother quickly finishing that job. The part that includes the part quickly finishing that job is quite clearly a VP by virtue of the fact that it's got a head with a noun phrase complement. That only happens in PPs and VPs everywhere else in English. And the fact that the modifier word is in the adverb form, that only happens, as far as we know, in VPs. Otherwise. So we look across the language, those are diagnostics of verb phrases. A modifier that is in adverb form, a complement that is in DP or noun phrase form, bare DP noun phrase form, without any of. So if you go and you do the same thing, you turn it into a noun, and you've got the same complement, that noun phrase after where it's a complement of a noun or an adjective, it will have an of before it necessarily, or some other preposition. We quite clearly have, so on the one hand, that's one thing we have to take account of, right? That we've got something that looks like a VP, and hypothesis A handles that, right? All of the hypotheses, in fact, handle that. All of them say that you've got a VP here. The question is, how big is the VP and what all is included in it, and so forth. And then the other observation is that, another observation is that the overall thing has the overall distribution. So its external properties are that the whole thing behaves like a DP to some extent, right? If you were to say, well, what is it most like? It's most like a DP in terms of its distribution. But it's so externally like a DP, internally like a VP. And the only one of these hypotheses that give you that is hypothesis C, right? Because it says, well, I'm a DP from the outside, and I'm a VP from the inside. And I am that way because my head projects both, right? So in some versions of this, I would be shown as being a word that is of both categories, D and V. I'm D/V. I'm D/V, well, then I project both, right? So there are ways of doing it. So for example, we have, without a chance to fix things, we are going to be in deep trouble. Without requires that its complement be a DP. There's no other possibility in general, right? But it's okay to have one of these without fixing things, without us fixing things. So no, it actually could go both ways, right? Without fixing things or without us fixing things, right? Whether or not you put that subject of the VP in there or not, you've got something that's behaving like a DP. So actually in both cases, and I say that you have the same analysis for both of them, either with us or without us in there. In the case that the us is missing, that's due to some kind of DP ellipsis. You're not specifying what the DP is because you're getting it. Here, in this case here, you actually can get it from, we are going to be in deep trouble, right? Wouldn't you? If I just said, without fixing things, we're going to be in deep trouble, then you interpret that as meaning what? Without us fixing things, we're going to be in deep trouble, right? Because the content of that subject slot there is recoverable from the discourse. And it's in a certain kind of configuration, whereby it's actually a configuration of what is called control, where higher subject generally controls the interpretation of a missing subject in an embedded construction. So with or without the us there, we've got the same problem in some sense. We've got something that's behaving. It's in the slot of a DP. Okay, so let's take hypothesis C. The problem is that we could what we could get rid of is this, right? That's a problematic assumption. That would be done. We could go home, go to the beach, right? Our assumption was wrong, and that might be the right answer, right? But what I want to do right now, today, is explore what would be a solution that doesn't require us to abandon that assumption. And I guess we also, well, it's not clear to what extent, and sometimes it isn't clear, I guess, that the complement and the arguments of living has two arguments, right? Person that lives and place, right? Those are both arguments of live, right? Because you can't say, right? And ordinarily we wouldn't just say, yeah, we live, right? No, if we live, inhabit, when we mean live meaning inhabit, well, there's a place argument, right? So there's two arguments there. I guess it depends on how you look at it, right? You could say that there's living, if that's a verb, then it doesn't have a specifier argument in this construction. But you're saying it's also a D. Well, it does there, right? So it's not clear exactly where we're at with respect to that. But we could give that up too, right? There's no reason to give that up. But let's call this hypothesis E, because when I first made these slides, I had a hypothesis D that was really stupid. And so I'm just going to skip that. So what if we do this, though? Let's say that the ing part, and this is actually this is an analysis that has been appealed to in the literature for this construction and other kinds of things, right? So one strategy that this theory that we're looking at uses is to separate out inflectional morphology and have it in general occupy nodes in the overall structure. And we can think of the ing is a piece of inflectional morphology, right? Ing is a little bit tricky in that sometimes it looks like it's a derivational suffix, right? And it all depends on the context. So if you take build, you can add the ing on it as an inflectional suffix when you say we are building something, right? But if you say we did that in the building over there, then it looks like the ing is going on there to take build into a noun, right? But it's not entirely clear what that phenomenon is, right? Another way of looking at it is that you put the inflectional suffix on it and you get building, and that building can just be converted into a noun by a separate process, not by the inflectional morphology being put on, right? So that stuff is a little bit unclear, but in any case, there's no reason not to say that the ing here is an affix, and that we can separate it out into the structure. And one of the things that it does is to make it be the case that things like live can be nouns, right, essentially. Can be heads of noun phrases in the broad sense. And the way that you get that to be, one way to get that to be is that ing is the D in an overall DP. It's the thing that's making it be the case that we've got a noun phrase with a noun and so forth. Right? But obviously we don't pronounce it like this. So, in this theory, that's kind of a normal thing to do. Once you start separating these things out and having them be abstract constructs that you would find in lots of different languages, and then languages would differ with respect to how they make things join up, how they get all the pieces to go together, right? That's sort of the big picture, right? That languages all have the same kind of basic structures with the same kinds of pieces, and in some cases they rearrange those basic abstract. The basic abstract structure gets rearranged for whatever reason. Probably no language actually does exactly this, right? But there are some languages that do something similar, right? It would be a word that has the character of making a verb phrase into a noun phrase, right? So that's the idea here. And therefore, all we would need is to have movement, right? And there's two kinds of movements, and these are all kinds of movements that we're going to say happens all over the place. This is just routine kind of movement. This is the same movement that's going to happen in most ordinary clauses in most languages, in fact. If we analyze, I think we did it with Portuguese, right? With Portuguese, well, we didn't do the subject moving part, right? But we're going to basically say that all subjects of any particular word head originate as a specifier of the phrase projected by that head, universally. And then it's going to be the case that those things are, in many languages, maybe even most, those subject noun phrases will move up into a subject of clause slot or whatever. So here the only difference between this and a clause is what we're saying. We're saying that DPs are like clauses. This is an observation that has been in the syntactic theory literature for a long time. Noun phrases and clauses are similar kinds of structure. And we're going to say that, in fact, inflection in clauses is separated out into that infl node, right? The I node inside of a clause is the place where the inflection goes, and it might only be there abstractly. And what will happen in many languages is the verb will move up to it in order for the thing to work. Because inflection, if they're actually phonologically realized affixes, they have to glom onto something. And the most natural place would be on the verb. So verbs, and so things move around. That's going to be straightforward. Here we show the DP moving out of the verb phrase and up to the specifier position of the whole thing. And the verb, in this case, because ing is a suffix, something's got to happen. The general, there are general, we haven't done this yet, but there are general universal constraints on what kinds of operations like this you can do. And one of them is, if you are a head, you can move up to the next head slot. And so forth, right? So there are, so the nice thing about this, I mean, maybe the thing that might leave one uncomfortable is the abstractness of it. We're not showing the actual, there's a kind of underlying structure that is abstract. And then there are these transformational processes that yield the structure that you actually see on the surface. Okay, but you've got the idea, right? Not really all that hard, right? We're kind of killing several birds with one stone. We're making it be a VP, and we're making it be a DP at the same time. And we're getting the right pieces in the right structure with nothing more than what we're going to do for lots of other cases. And therefore, we could say is motivated, and we're going to do it for different languages, and we're going to allow different languages to have different combinations of these processes. Head-to-head movement and DP movement through the clause, where you move from one specifier or argument position into a specifier position higher up. Things that we're going to find multiple motivations for. Okay, that's something to keep in mind here. Okay, so then what we've got is a situation in which we've got two kinds of really basic things in languages: IPs, clauses, and DPs, noun phrases, clauses. Those are key pieces. The clauses are built around the verbs at some level because they're giving you a meaning that is about an event or a process, an event structure that you've got there. And DPs are giving you, in general, the things involved in events. But they themselves can have event structure in them. So here we've got a case where the semantic core of the phrase is something with a relatively rich meaning, right? Dog. And it would be, the meaning of dog would be this, right? Which is a rich meaning because there's a full image that you can generate from dog, and you can give it, so in different theories of meaning, you can give it you can spell out the rich structure. I'm going to use like a sort of baby version of natural semantic meta language I've used before because because it's right, you understand it. You don't have to there's no special symbols or anything. But I'm using a kind of baby version of it. So dog is a thing, right? Something, right? I guess, right? You want to say more. You want to say it's something alive, right? And you can say that's something alive, but we don't. By the time we get through giving it all the meaning, it will emerge that it's something alive, right? It's something a person, and about this thing a person can think. This something is very much like a person. You can think that about dogs, right? Assume that that's what people think, right? No, notice I'm not doing this like in this kind of scientific nomenclature. You could try that, but it turns out that doesn't really work very well. Say it's got 4 legs, and what you end up at some point saying it belongs to family canine or something, okay, whatever the Latin is, right? Caninus vulgaris or something or other, right? Which means dog, right? So, I'm just making this up too, by the way. But I think it's about right. It's probably right. This is something very much like a person. Because of this, many people want to have one of these. Isn't that true? And if I just gave you this, you would know what I was talking about, especially if I gave you this. When this something wants to say something, it barks. Is that true? Does that characterize what a dog is? Kind of, right? Maybe not everything, but that's the basic concept, isn't it? Something people like to have. Man's best friend or something or other, right? It talks to us. Dogs talk to us. Dogs will say, I don't know. My daughter has got a dog that she calls her. I swear to God, she comes to my house and she says, "Oh, Grandpa," it's like she really thinks it's her child, right? Because dogs are kind of like people, and they talk to us, and we talk back to them, and so forth, right? And they understand us and all that. So that's a dog. It's a rich concept, right? But it doesn't have it doesn't have semantic arguments typically, right? Because it's a thing, right? It's just the word refers to a thing in the world, and there's no process, right? Other than embedded in there in the meaning, there's bark and say and maybe feel. You probably want to say dogs feel things like people feel, right? Don't they? And all of that, but there's no actual. It's really just designating a thing, and so there are no semantic arguments. And it can have various kinds of adjunct modifiers, right? That's part of the whole structure of a DP. So we can have a loud, finicky baby dog with a long tail or whatever, right? We put in a bunch of modifiers, and they're going to go in a special way because this is a DP, or it's a noun phrase in there, right? That has modifiers of the head noun. And then we've got another piece here that we could call kind of like the grammatical glue, right? The grammatical stuff, right? It's a piece of the grammar. The doesn't have a rich meaning. It's hard to even say what the meaning is, right? I mean, I attempted at some point to give you one kind of thing that would be a meaning for this, but it's mostly what it's there doing is saying something about the dog being, if you said a loud dog was barking, then you're saying, there is such a thing, and I haven't talked to you about it before, or something like that, right? And then it's going to, and there's one of them, and it's going to demand that, so the grammatical part here is to say, I need to have a noun a head noun somewhere with the properties singular and plus bounded, meaning singular count noun, right? Because I need to have something that counts as just a single contained unit of some kind. That's what bounded means. Okay, right? So the is in there as a piece of the grammar. And then in clauses, you get the same thing. That's the basic idea, right, that I've been saying. Said this a bunch of ways over and over already. Right? You get the semantic core of the phrase with a relatively rich meaning, bark, right? To really bark, that's a subtype of phrase within a clause, right? So I'm saying, I'm assuming that the two here is in the I node, and there's lots of good reasons to. I think I went through some of the evidence for that. It's indicating lack of tense, and the I node is where you usually put tense information. And the I node, it's good that we have it be not some category like auxiliary verb, because this ain't no verb, all right? But it's in the slot where an auxiliary would go. So we've got a rich concept of bark, right? We got the idea, right? The dog's bark, right? It's going to have a meaning something like this. The meaning of X barks is something, X does something. When this happens, a person can think it's like X wants to say something. Isn't that right? Isn't that what bark means? Sort of, right? Sort of. I mean, at least for ordinary people in ordinary circumstances, that's what bark means. You could say something else. You could say, well, it's when you make this noise with your, I don't know, what would you say otherwise, right? It's this noise you make by, it's going to come down to, you do like a dog does, right? Right, so this is something that dogs do, would be part of the concept of bark. Other animals could do it, but okay. So we've got and in this case, it does have semantic arguments, and that is the dog barks or someone barks. A person could bark like a dog, right? Another animal could, and it can have various kinds of adjunct modifiers as well. So to really bark like a mad dog late at night and so forth, right? We can throw adjunct modifiers in, and they're going to go in a particular order because this is a verb phrase underneath all of this. And then you've got the grammatical glue is up here, right? Where we have this sort of really vague meaning thing, right? To say that there's any meaning at all is kind of hard even, right? Because it's just meaning, the meaning is the grammar part of the whole thing, right? I mean that there's lack of tense, and that's going to have grammatical consequences. So the form of things that come after me are going to be determined by me. I'm saying I'm a minus finite clause, and so the verb is going to be, and there's going to be other specifications. Verb must be in infinitive form. Interpret this according to the context, because there's no, however you want, because there's no thing. And there's a, so there's a, all of this stuff, right? So we've got to really bark. If the arguments are syntactically expressed, they have to be in the specifier or complement position of the VP projected by this, so we just do that, right? Why not? That's where my dog gets put. My dog really barked into the VP slot. So this is the how do we do this, right? Well, here's how it goes. We gave evidence. I looked at some of the evidence for this, right? with the way that quantifier float works. We can account for quantifier float in English by saying that this happened. So let's do that. We say, my dog, we've got a complete structure there. So a VP can be a unit that has all of that stuff in it. But because of the grammar of English and constraints that we have in the grammar, it's usually not going to stay there. It's going to, for example, there's something we call the subject condition. Sometimes this goes, lately they've been using this, they've been using terminology like, because it's stupid, I'm not using it, but extended projection principle, which amounts to, this is all this rigmarole about what it means and all that, but it amounts to this. Have a subject for clauses, right? And this is something that wouldn't necessarily hold in all languages, but it holds in English. We would claim that if you've got an IP, there must be, that subject slot needs to be filled in general, especially, well, we'll see, it doesn't actually have. It doesn't have to be, we'll say that it has to be filled, but it can be filled by, like everything now, right? In this new world that we're looking at. Everything can be null, but we would still say that the subject position is filled if there's something null there. My dog to really bark then would have a structure like this, where my dog is in the specifier of IP slot, and it binds a trace of itself in the specifier of VP slot. This is the way that movement is expressed in the structure. So you don't really, so at some level, when the idea would be, to the extent that this is any kind of theory of processing, we would process this as in the way that it actually is spoken, but we would know in the background that essentially my dog is an argument of work, and of the verb work, and therefore occupies the subject of verb slot semantically, and in this theory, therefore also syntactically. Because where we're headed is that this will actually be a representation of meaning. Of the meanings of sentences are represented in the structure that we give for the syntactic structure. Has at least much of the meaning is displayed there. Okay, so we've got a subject condition that accounts for that. So if we have, here's a case where we're starting to build out this sentence, and where do we get my dog to really bark, right? Because my dog to really bark doesn't usually happen all by itself, but it happens in various kinds of constructions, like for my dog to really bark. It would be nice for my dog to really bark, right? For my dog to really bark would be nice. For my dog to really bark would be a good thing. There's all kinds of constructions in which we can take that, and we know it's actually a phrase, right? Because it behaves like one. Right? We can do pseudo-clefting. What would be nice would be for my dog to bark. Well, yeah, you could do that, right? And so, or for my dog to really bark. Whatever. The really is the point. The key thing here is that's a adverbial thing that's telling me that we've got a verb in there. Right? So you're with me here so far, right? This is all making sense, sort of? Okay. So that's one kind of construction that we can get this in, but we can get it in other ones as well. And we're not going to go through all of the cases, but it has been proposed that if you have a verb like want, it can have, and people will do this in different ways. Actually, you could do it with, well, actually, this is a different case where we just have the IP, right? But you can actually do it, well, you can't do it with want, but, well, you could do it, it's kind of interesting, right? You say, I want my dog to really bark, but if I pseudo-cleft that, if I want to pseudo-cleft it, what do I have to do? What I want is my dog to really bark. Is that any good? What I want is my dog to really bark? No. What I want is for my dog to really bark, right? Kind of interesting, right? So the one actual, I'm not showing this, but one actual version of the structure for this is that you've got a CP, and the for is just null, right? And then when you do pseudo-clefting, you force it out. So it's interesting, right? So we have all of these kinds of situations where there's seems to actually be abstract structure with null content to it, right? And then you have other verbs like you can substitute for want. You could substitute would like, which is a kind of compound, right? The would is it's not exactly a compound because the would is clearly an auxiliary. But I would like for my dog to really bark is fine, right? I would like my dog to really bark, or I would like for my dog to really bark, either one, right? So the for thing is something that can kind of disappear like complementizers do, right? I think that I should go, I think I should go. The that can float in and out. But if you pseudocleft anything, the that is forced there, I think, right? What I think is I should go. Is that right? No, what I think is, well, I don't know. How's the word? What I think is that you should do your homework. What I think is you should do your homework. That's no good, right? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't work at all. And never mind. I'm just sort of, sometimes I just float in and out of stupid ideas or good ideas. Sometimes they're good, right? So that's why you do it, but whatever. Okay, so we've got, so the key point here is IPs and DPs are very much the same thing, although they do have differences, right? So we've got DPs and VPs all have the same kind of thing. There's a semantic core that's expressed, that's the head of the whole thing. And it's the head of a verb phrase or a noun phrase. They've got grammatical glue pieces that are in the same spot. We've got parallel structures across them. And then we've got the possibility for additional grammatical glue. We can put in complementizers. So the IP level gives you the tense and clause-like inflection and stuff. The CP level gives you complementizers that are, now what are they there for, right? You don't need them. Plenty of languages don't have them. It's not a necessity. It's not a conceptual necessity. It's something that's part of the English grammatical glue. You can't do many sentences without that. And in the case of determinative phrases, you've got especially the articles, right? The articles are grammatical glue stuff, and you can also then, in some sense, remember when we were saying, well, you know what, these complementizers, we could say that they're prepositions. Well, why could we say that? Well, because they're kind of like prepositions, conceptually, right? And if we were to say, with a loud dog, I went somewhere with a loud dog, the with there is much less of a kind of rich semantic meaning. So it's sort of like for, and all that kind of stuff in a way, right? And so we can think of that as being a kind of piece of grammatical glue, although it does have it has more meaning than for and to do here, right, at some level. There's a kind of have meaning there that you wouldn't get with the other one. But so then the idea is that we've got two parts of all phrases, not all phrases, but the main parts of the clause structure have parallel parts all the way up. And one part of that we're going to call the functional shells. So the idea here is that phrase structure is going to come, the syntax of sentences is going to come from templates for building sentences that are going to be universal, with differences about order of parts across different languages. But these are things that you'll find in languages everywhere. This is universal stuff. And languages would have functional shells as well as, so the template that we're showing here in red would be the functional shell part, and the other part would be called the lexical shells. And the lexical shells are those things that come from things that have richer meaning. The richer meaning part of the sentences, the indispensable parts, the stuff that you'd find in all languages, you'd find counterparts in some sense. Whereas the functional shell, whatever it gets fleshed out with in languages can differ considerably, right? Because some languages wouldn't have determiners. They wouldn't have articles, right? definite and indefinite articles, that's far from anything universal. There's some languages don't have anything that are really prepositions, or they would have something corresponding to that. And there you find something like with the meaning with in some fashion across, at least across most languages. But so that's the idea. We have these kinds of things. So the functional shells are the projections of clause structure, and it works in the same way, that are for functional categories, and those would be, in this theory, C, there might be some more, but the main ones would be C, complementizers, I, inflection, and a family of actually categories that you could break up for inflection, subcategories and so forth. D and P, those would be things, and they're sometimes called, in traditional grammar, these would be called closed class words, because the number of the words that you would put in the dictionary for each class is relatively small. And languages typically don't add or subtract very much to them. They're conservative with these things. So the things that would be in category P in English would be somewhere maybe around 40, something like that, and some other languages would have very few. There's a language, Salish language spoken in Washington, the state of Washington, that I know of, that basically has one P. That goes in, at least within verb phrases, there's one P, and that works for all kinds of things, right? You don't need to have lots of them. Whereas the lexical categories, V, N, and A, verbs and nouns and adjectives, there are lots of those, and they're conceptually richer. The meanings are richer and so forth. And those are called lexical categories by Mark Baker, who in this book, the book that I'm showing you here, makes the case for these being universals of language. All languages, according to him, would have verb, noun, and adjective. And that's actually a controversial claim. Not everyone agrees with that. I think probably everyone agrees that verb and noun are universally instantiated in languages. What each language would include in, what the concepts that would go into those categories would differ. They could differ, but that's a really basic distinction that languages have, and it's a conceptual distinction, right? We think of the world as consisting of things and processes that relate them, and that the things move around and contact each other and hit each other and interact with each other, and then so there's the process part, and there's the concept of the acting entities, the things being acted on or acting and so forth. And that corresponds to probably something in the actual physical universe, right? Where there are particles and waves, and there are, all of that kind of stuff. But we don't know, right? Because we could be just projecting that on. So we have want to really, let's take this one, want to really rain. We've got a concept like this, right? Rain, process. So this would be one of those event things, one of the things that involves a process of some kind, and rain designates that process. And we could give it a meaning like this: something is happening. Because of this, water is not a basic. So the one thing I put in capital letters here are concepts that can be defined, right? Those are not primitive concepts. Probably fall into the problem. Whatever, I can't do it all, right? And pieces is probably not. Well, anyway, you got the idea. But in this case, it has no semantic arguments, right? Does rain have any semantic arguments? You can't say the water rains. Well, I guess you probably could, right? The water rains from the sky in little droplets. No, it falls from the sky in little droplets, right? rain encapsulates that whole concept. Little droplets of water falling from the sky, that's what it designates. And what we know about this is that if we look across languages, what do we usually find when a language expresses rain? It's just a verb, that's it, right? No DPs or NPs or anything like that at all. But because we have it, so here's some evidence that we've got a subject condition. The subject condition says, well, if you're an IP, you must have a syntactic subject, and therefore we throw in an it. I want it to really rain, where the it is there just because of that, the subject condition. And so this is called a dummy it, or whether it, or expletive it. There's different terminology that's used for it, but it's a placeholder in the syntactic structure with which English satisfies this condition, the subject condition. Right? So the different pieces of this story we can motivate in different ways, right? We think there is a subject condition, and so forth. And so if we have my dog constantly barking, we have a VP in the present participle form. And here I'm starting to show like the grammatical features of and I've been doing this all along, right? You can show the grammatical features of different phrases in the tree if you want. So things can be all fleshed out to to a large extent. And I'll just put it, it's not really what you would just draw the tree without that. But you could put it there, and I'm doing it in shadow font to indicate that it's not something that's really there in some sense, but it is there in an abstract way. And then we know we can embed this under B, because that present participle, or progressive participle, whatever you want to call it, that barking thing is often the ing on bark, on the verb, is there because the overall construction wants it to be, and it's there because be, as an auxiliary verb, demands that there be when it's being used in this fashion to give you this kind of meaning, demands that there be a present participle, right? It's part of the grammar of be. So that's satisfying the auxiliary verb's need. And then we can put this whole thing into a larger shell, which would be, we could call the present progressive, it should be IP shell. I just made a mistake, and that's a typo. This is the present progressive IP shell. There's a functional shell for this. The VP part is the lexical shell. There's a verb, barking, projects a VP. Semantic arguments are instantiated. In the appropriate slots, there's a general condition that the actor will be instantiated as in the specifier position of a phrase. And then we've got, above that, we're throwing in an IP shell. And because of that, we move the auxiliary verb into I, right? Where it takes on the present, so that abstractly the present tense feature is in I. And in this case, I haven't done this before yet, but English actually there's evidence for English having verb movement. And the verb movement will occur whenever there's an auxiliary verb. So an auxiliary verb the first auxiliary verb, if there's only one, that auxiliary verb will go in I. So the V moves out up to the I slot, and the subject condition forces my dog to move up to the IP, specifier of IP slot, right? Okay, so just the same stuff that we're going to see over and over again, leaving behind traces that we can mark in the tree. Those nodes we can say are still there. Our knowledge of this is that all of that structure is there. And we change be to is because present tense form has to be. So my dog is constantly barking would be the IP shell for this, but we can change barking into a noun by virtue of simple verb to noun conversion. barking is a perfectly good noun, and we know this is a noun because we've got constant. We've done this before, right? So my dog is constantly barking. The neighborhood dog song would be that's a barking can have this is actually a DP complement for barking. Barking isn't necessarily intransitive, but this is a kind of thing where the DP complement is, there's a terminology for it. Christian, do you remember what this is? It's the, I can't remember where you are, where the DP complement is only repeating information or something.
Live a good life.
Huh?
Live a good life.
Lived a good life or sang, huh? I can't remember the name of it, but that's what we've got here in some sense. But you can put a DP on the end there, right? And then we can change it into if we change it into a noun, we can carry that complement along with it, right? Because why? Because DPs and VPs, all I'm saying is that DPs and IPs are the same thing, right? And everything you can do within a verb phrase, for the most part, has some instantiation inside of a DP, inside of the DP life of the same thing, right? So that's interesting stuff, right? So we can say the constant barking of the neighborhood dog song would be a possible verb phrase as well. And in this case, because it has the N is derived from a V, it has a semantic argument. It's going to inherit that. And it's still the case that the semantic, so unlike in verb phrases, here's a difference, right? Verb phrases, so there are differences, right? The verb phrases do not generally allow their semantic arguments to be implicit. They have to either be expressed or be elided. That's different from being implicit, potentially, right? You can be elided because there's something in the discourse that makes you not have to be there. But to be totally implicit is not generally a possibility for verbs, but it is fine for nouns. Nouns just generally, because they want to be, right? Nouns want to be designating things. And things don't usually have semantic argument. And so therefore, you often don't get the subjects and complements with nouns. But in both cases, there needs to be an appropriate functional shell. So for the NP, and if you put in the subject argument, we can put in there, right? That's where we put it. But we need to have a functional shell. And one way of getting a functional shell is to put in the genitive DP shell. So there's going to be some different versions. Like just with the IP, you can get different versions depending on exactly what you want to get. And one kind of DP shell that you can get is what we could call the genitive one, because we can say that this is the genitive form of the genitive. Just means possessor, right? There's nothing really informative about calling it genitive. It's probably not really genitive case as such. It's a particle of some kind that gets put on. But that's a kind of common terminology that we use. So we could say that's the genitive DP shell, my dog's constant barking that we looked at before. So in this case, actually my dog, we could say starts out in the NP, but moves up into the DP slot because there's going to be a condition on this kind of phrase that says, well, it's sort of like the same thing that we saw before, right? If I'm, like with the ing, right? If I'm a z, then I have to go on to something, and there better be something there for me to go on to, and there better be a DP. That's one way of looking at it, right? The other, or another way of looking at it is that the D, this is probably a better way of looking at it, if we say that the D node in there actually has semantic content, like have, then have, with that concept, you have to have a haver, right? And so therefore there has to be something in that slot. So there's different ways of sort of motivating why that would be the case, but it's parallel, right? A noun can have a semantic argument that you can say is generated in the specifier of NP slot. And then the grammar can force it to move up into the specifier of DP slot. So we get, the same thing across different categories. Now, what we want now here, so then we can take this a little bit further, and you actually get a different kind of genitive DP shell. So this is stuff that isn't like sort of obvious, right? That you actually have a bunch of different options in English, right? And where you get smushing together of different categories. So we can actually not only put an NP into it. This is kind of a little bit off the wall kind of stuff, or not off the wall, no, out of the box kind of thinking about these things, right? But perfectly consistent with this theory and with what you predict, right? You predict. Why would it be the case that Ds can only have NP complements? That's the typical scenario. Is it the only one? Well, here's good evidence that it's not the only one. You can do things like my dog's constantly barking, as in, because of my dog's constantly barking the neighborhood dog song, I could say something like this, couldn't I? Because of my dog's constantly barking, with or without the neighborhood dog song, right? Fred decided to shoot him, right? Because he's always barking, right? That's what you could say. You could do it that way, right? You say, because my dog's always barking, right? But you could also do it this way, right? For whatever reason, we're allowed to do this kind of thing. But I guess it's just only because of the flexibility of the whole system, right? We've got similar structures across different kinds of overall phrases. And we've got different processes for having verb phrases transform themselves in some sense into noun phrases. So if I have something like this, my dog's constantly barking the neighborhood dog song, that whole thing has the distribution of a DP. And that's by virtue of it being able to be plugged into a DP shell. But we don't actually, here's the key thing, right? We don't actually have to turn the verb phrase into a noun phrase. It can just stay a verb phrase, and we know it's staying a verb phrase. I mean, this is a case where we have smushing together of two kinds of things, right? The whole thing is a DP. It's got a subject, but the subject has a z on it. And then the thing that comes after it has the internal structure of the VP, right? Doesn't it? Yeah.
I just kind of want to survey the class. This thing sounds awful to me.
Oh, it doesn't sound good to you? You can't say this? Because my dog's constantly barking the neighbor, you can't say something like that?
Yeah.
You wouldn't say what? Oh, you would leave that off, right? My dog's constantly barking? Because of my dog's constantly barking? Okay, so let's put something else. We could get this kind of structure in some other case, right? So, without my dogs constantly barking the neighborhood dog song, this would be a boring neighborhood. Without my dogs constantly, can you say something like that? Can't do that.
I just want to turn it into a noun.
You want to try? Yeah. So you would prefer to have it be something else, right? But it's a possibility that we do this, and there are all kinds of cases where we do this, right? I'll show you some other examples later, right? So if you don't like this example, yeah, it is a little bit weird, right? I was just, I was thinking about dogs and barking, and I said, let's make some crap up, But you'll see there's other cases like this. This is a classic construction of English. It's and it goes by different. There's different terminology for it. One kind of terminology is I can't remember, pos VP construction or something like that, possessive VP construction, right? So it's a construction that exists. I'll show you some other examples. But there's another. I'll come back to some other examples like that. But there's another way of doing that. We could say, my dog constantly barking, right? So we've come full circle. We're coming back to what we started out with. The question of how you can get my dog constantly barking. My dog's constantly barking bothers people. You could say that, right? My dog's constantly barking, or my dog constantly barking. So there's probably I think there's a kind of, one of the things that we're confronting here. and we'll put it out there so that you know. There, I think in the younger generations, the one with the z never happens. So that's one of the things that maybe that's what you're reacting. So my daughter would never use the possessive S one, that z one. The genitive DP construction is fading from the language. For me, it's perfectly fine because I'm an old geezer, right? But the younger generation is gone for the most part. So that's something to be aware of. Because the way you would say it is, my dog constantly barking is really annoying, right? Or it really annoys me. My dog constantly, you can't do that? I don't like your dog constantly barking. You do that, right? I don't like your dog constantly barking. But some people say, I don't like your dogs constantly barking. Your dog's barking. You could do that, right? Your dog's barking. Like, there's all kinds of different ways you could do it. But this one is different, right? The key thing here is that we've got two different things. We've got an accusative DP V-ing shell. We've got a V-ing structure with what you could call an accusative DP rather than a genitive one. You could see it better with having, right? So I don't like your brother's having done that, there's an S on it. I don't like his having done that. Can you do that? Same thing. It's the same construction. I don't like his having done that. I don't like him having done that. You can do both, right? So you prefer the first one? Because the older you are, the more likely you are to prefer the old. I mean, I'm not saying, but it's true. It's true. That construction is like I say, fading, right? And so younger people would tend to just do the accusative one. But those two options are both there. Okay. So we can also do this, right? Because of well, maybe you can. This one's okay, right? That one sounds better? Okay, it's the genitive versus accusative thing. You guys don't like genitive construction. But we've got the same thing at some level, right? It's the case that we just have the possibility of having here's what I'm going to say, right? It's actually very interesting. The D can be no Z in it at all. But what I'm going to claim, and this is very interesting, is that in this case, what you've got is what? If there were a semantic piece there, what would it be? Nobody liked my mother's cleaning her house. Can you do it? You guys don't like this? Is that the problem? Okay, this is fine, right? Okay, let me show what the facts are. Nobody liked my mother cleaning her house. Nobody liked my mother's cleaning her house. Both of those are legitimate constructions. His having fixed the car is great. Him having fixed the car would have been great. Him having fixed the car would have been great. His having fixed the car would have been great. Okay, so there's a preference for having one versus the other depending on certain things, right? And so let's see what the things are. Would him building another house be a good idea? Would him building another house be a good idea? That's okay, right? Well, I'm not talking about writing, right? Obviously, I'm not talking about writing, right? In writing, you would probably just avoid all of this stuff, right? And if you did do it, you would do the genitive one, right? Because why? Because the teachers all think that's some kind of great thing, right? You're showing sophistication, yeah.
Would you choose him over he?
Before choosing what?
He versus him.
Oh, you would never use he, right? In this construction, because it only comes in two forms. And the reason we're saying it's accusative versus genitive is actually not because of the general case, but the case where there's pronouns. And the pronouns in this construction come in the two different forms. The genitive form would be his, and the accusative form, accusative is probably not the right word, but whatever, that's what that's generally called. The accusative-ing construction, that's what it's called. Okay, so the two constructions are sometimes called the accusative-ing and the possessing, possessive-ing, or genitive-ing, right? The ing constructions where you've got the interesting thing about it is that the ing part of it, this is what's cool about the grammar of English and complicated, is that the ing part is actually a VP-like thing. But the overall thing, this is the thing we're looking at, is like a DP. And then what I'm claiming beyond that, these whole things are like little clauses. They're clause structures being displayed over a DP shell. Right? But yeah, it's interesting, right? So you're asking why it's him and not he?
Well, yeah, I misspoke.
You can say both ways. You can't do it. You can't do it with he, right? Can you?
No, I think I misspoke.
Okay.
I think it's his versus him.
Yeah.
So would a spoken shift be towards?
It's toward the him.
The him.
Yeah.
The his, because that sounds closer together.
I don't think so. I think it's just because it's a fairly they're both not constructions that are used a whole lot. Okay? And so you're looking at them and going, why would you bother to have two different kinds of the same thing, right? And so if you're going to simplify it, you simplify it to the more common one. And so in the language in general, him is way more common than his. And I think also the actual processing of it with his is more complex, right? Because you've got to figure out that z part of it and all that, right? Yeah.
Well, I was thinking that the last is just alive him. Just speaking it, I would say either building out.
You don't see a difference?
No, I see the difference. It's just I would align.
Oh, you would align them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I would have put them in.
No, you wouldn't be able to,
or
right?
I would have like using for.
No, but see, if I said having fixed the car is great, that would be fine. But I would have had to have known.
No, I mean just for the last two sentences.
Oh.
For the other two, I was like, yeah, I might use those, but that usually the last two.
But you wouldn't know. Yeah, you could, right? But if you wanted to specify who it is you're talking about, because if you elided them, it would be vague as to who you were talking about, right? Doing the building, right? And in fact, you would take it. I think that's not quite right, because if I said, would building another house be a good idea? Then the meaning of that would have to come from the context where you're thinking, for us, we're the ones who built the house, and then you could fill it in. But it's not like you can necessarily fill it in. What you're saying? There's several people that could be building a house. Would him building the house be a good idea? You would kind of be forced to do it, wouldn't you? You'd have to point to someone, and you mean his doing it, right? Or him doing it. You know, I could do it both ways, right? His doing it, his building his house would be a good idea. I would do it mostly that way. Him building the house would be a good idea, not his building. But whatever. I mean, it's complicated, right? But I think there's actually I can't imagine that dog ever barking. So we're coming back to the imagine construction. I can't imagine that dog ever barking like mine. Now, notice what we've got here, right? This is actually, the other ones I was doing are a little bit more unnatural. But with imagine, I think this is the way you do it, right? The normal way to do it, right? I can't imagine that dog ever barking like mine. That seems perfectly fine, right? You could also say, I can't imagine that dog would ever bark like mine. You could do it in an IP shell. But the IP shell is way more complex. And it has stuff you don't need, right? So you could choose the one of these deep. I can't imagine that dog's ever barking like mine. That doesn't seem good to me. I'm putting the hash mark to say, huh? I don't think it's just because I can do both, right? I don't have a problem doing both. But here, I couldn't do it like that. And so why is that, right? So you have to, in order to go through what the contexts are, you have to be a speaker of the language that can accept both to begin with, right? And not everyone can. We know that. So without Tom getting a different job, we won't make it. That seems fine, right? Without my husband getting a new job, we're going to be in big trouble. That's okay, right? Without Tom's getting a new job, we're going to be in trouble. That sounds bad to me, right? I don't think that's good. But I can actually tease out where it's okay. Without him earning more money, that's not good, right? Without his earning more money, It's bad, right? So where are the cases? Let's say I got some with him, with his earning more money. Here, so I think it's okay, right? If you do it like this, with his earning more money, we were able to buy a decent house. With his earning more money, that's fine. With him earning more money, I could do it either way in that case. But the key thing is here, I think you're putting different construals on the whole thing by your choice about these things. It's not an arbitrary thing. There are different construals you give to the event, and it's going to be better in general. The genitive one implies that a specific action or event of the kind depicted by the VP has already occurred. It has occurred. It's a fact. And then, so that's why it would be okay with his earning more money, with his getting with his getting a promotion. We're in good shape now. It's happened. He owns that promotion, right? Whereas the other one, the accusative one, is simply doesn't have that implication at all. It doesn't have to have occurred. Him having a better job will make it so that we have more money. That's just a potentiality, right? So a potential thing that could happen. It doesn't have that implication. So this is actually interesting. So then we actually can have an explanation for what's going on here by virtue of the meaning differences in the two constructions. My dog's constantly barking would have the implication of having happened. And the have would have the same value that it has in the perfect construction, the perfect participle construction. I have built a house. It's done. It's a done deal. It's something that is completed. I am building a house, something that isn't completed right at all. So have by its very, that's part of the nature of the concept have. And it's interesting because this displays itself out across lots of different languages. Have is used to indicate completion. Whole things, events have come to completion. And so if this is right, the genitive construction has a missing D in some sense, right? Or the Z is the D, but it's got the semantics of have are there. Whereas with the other one, the semantics of be is what you get. You get the semantics of the progressive participle. So you get my dog constantly barking. You got the concept of an event of barking that you're construing as a noun phrase. But you're not construing it as an event that has been completed necessarily. And that's by virtue, here's what I'm going to claim, by virtue of us having a D, we've got two Ds that are abstract, and they can be or have. And all we're doing is engaging, for these two different constructions, very, very primitive and basic and universal concepts that manifest themselves in languages over and over and over again in the form of auxiliary verbs and in the form of verbs like be and have, right? These concepts, the really basic ones of be and have that are there everywhere would be the claim in various fashions. And the whole construction can have those as part of it. So we can get be, by its very nature, is going to be wanting a present participle form, right? Okay, let's stop there.